Well, hello, everybody. It's Heather, and I'm excited today to be meeting with and chatting with Joe Kwon. And he's the author of Unlock Your Charisma. And he's also part of the Leadership with Heart community. And he was episode 34. And so I didn't give you any notice to be able to go back and listen to him, but you can definitely go listen to his brilliance after this show. And so he's going to talk to us a little about charisma. And I just have to let you know, like I came back from a volunteer event and I'm kind of like running around crazy, but I love to bring these LinkedIn lives to you. I love to highlight the leaders from the show. I mean, the reason why I do this is I highlight the people that are on the podcast here. And of course, they'll be in that next book that I keep promising everyone. And you'll see that as soon as I can get it done. But he is here today as part of that community. And that leader with heart is someone who tends to be more emotionally intelligent. And I think Joe's going to be talking a little bit about this today when he talks about his book and the unlocking charisma part of it, because there's a level of emotional intelligence that's involved in being a charismatic leader. And so those people that are leaders of the heart are those people. And it doesn't mean they are perfect. We are all works in progress. And I want that to always be the message to you who are listening in, is that we are all works in progress, no matter how quote unquote perfect all of us may appear out there in the universe. We all have our own issues that we're facing. And it's all on how we deal with it, right? So I just wanted to give that as a precursor to the discussion with Joe. But Joe, welcome on to the LinkedIn Live Leadership with Heart show.
Hi, Heather. I'm so excited to be here. I am excited to read your book, not just because I will be in it, but I love how you've put it out there in the world. So there's no turning back. You've promised it. Now you must deliver.
Yep. It's so funny. I had I can't remember which episode Keith's on, but when I told him about it, he's like, okay, now you're holding, it's on the show, it's on the podcast. And now we heard you and now we can hold you accountable. And I'm like, yes, please do. Please do. And give me feedback and tell me the things that you think are so unique that I need to make sure I highlight in the book, because sometimes, I'm in it. I'm in the weeds. I'm talking to you guys. But when you're out listening to all these different episodes and seeing the uniqueness of it, you're better positioned to be able to say what's the best way to position it. So, yep, it's out there, and I'm glad to have you part of the community too. So,
excellent.
So, what interesting things are happening right now? Are you have any interesting projects going on, or anything just cool and interesting you're doing right now?
So, one of the interesting things I'm doing is, I may have mentioned this to you in side conversations, but I'm really trying to develop more my training skills and transition into a role where I do a little bit more coaching and training. And I was excited to find out recently that a training that I developed is actually going to be delivered within our organization. So it's the equivalent of what they might like hire someone externally, like a vendor, to do it. I propose something and we're actually going to try it. It's what I like to call a networking boot camp, or a simulated networking exercise, where normally think about any corporate training you've been to and a lot of your audience has been to, right? What do? You walk into a conference room, you sit around a table, and hopefully this speaker's engaging, but mostly you just jot some notes or you look at your laptop or your phone, right? Like there's not a lot of real activity. If you're lucky, you do one or two role plays. So this kind of flips it on its head, where you go in and the actual lecturing part is like 20%, and 80% is actually spent implementing the skills. So what we're going to do is we're going to create simulated environments. Like, I'm not going to build an elevator, but I'm going to create a space as if you're walking into an elevator and say, practice your elevator speech with people in the training. So it's going to be all practice. So when you leave the training, you've actually had experience, versus you've gotten a lecture and now, like, what are you going to look at your notes before you go into an elevator? That's not really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. You better have that down. That's for sure.
Exactly. So super excited about that.
That's so cool. I remember you facilitating that session at No Longer Virtual, Sarah Elkin's brainchild. And boy, you were amazing. I said that to you too. I'm like, you are one heck of a facilitator. I do a lot of facilitations and I could learn a lot from you. So you probably, I can see you doing really well just teaching a course on how to facilitate in a kind of smooth and interactive way. So yeah, you were great there.
Oh, thank you.
To me, my interesting thing that before we get into your other stuff, the meat of it, I've told people, I was like, I put it out there to see if I can get an agent for this book that's based upon the podcast. And I don't think that's going to happen. And to be honest, I don't have a lot of time to invest in doing that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put it out to a few publishers and, got a couple no's and gotten some interest. And I'm deep in the middle of that part. While at the same time, I'm going, I have to make sure I get some time scheduled to continue to write around all of you guys. It's brilliance that came from that show. So that's probably the biggest beast. I have lots of client work I'm doing, but that's probably the biggest beast that I'm trying to conquer right now. It's been very interesting. Oh, and I also have a new speaker reel too. That's the other thing that I just got.
I think I saw that. It was nice. Yeah, I saw that.
Did I send that? Oh, that might have been. Where did I send that on Facebook? I can't even remember. Yeah, it was Facebook. That's why I didn't put it on LinkedIn.
I definitely saw your speaker reel. I was like, oh, Heather's got a speaker reel because I've just been learning about those.
I'm like, this is like my third iteration of it, and it's like you don't really love to watch yourself. So I mean, I was probably driving the guy absolutely nuts while I was trying to say, oh, I need you to do this. Oh, you cut that. Nope, got to add that. So yeah, it's interesting doing that. And having said that, you'll do like multiple iterations for me, I'll do multiple iterations. The better I get and the better audiences and engagement. Right. So it's just, it's kind of funny. So, well, okay. So I'd love now to chat about your book, because it's, I know you were so excited when you put it out and that you are hyper charismatic. So I just think I think it's great. You're like, yeah, that's me. I'm telling people how to do this because it's me. And it's so true. I mean, I don't think this is a lack of humility. It's really, I think that you are just meeting you and seeing how you were facilitating that session at Longer Virtual. I can see that you are charismatic as well. So talk to us a little bit about this idea of unlocking your charisma. Why did it have to be unlocked? I mean, don't many of us, aren't we just born with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say we are born with it. And what I would say is and by we, I don't mean necessarily like it's something you're intentionally doing, right? It's something that happens to us. We start to build these layers or have a way of navigating life, which ends up making us less sensitive to others and less able to do the things that are naturally charismatic. If you think about people who are most charismatic, it's like small children, right? Because they are totally vulnerable. They're not trying to impress you. They know how to take an adult who maybe is feeling a little bit down and say, oh my gosh, this kid is so cute. They're being so funny. That's essentially what, as human beings, we have inside us. But as adults, when it's almost like all the extra layers we put on ourselves, both from personality perspective, as well as from defensive type mechanisms, you actually end up sort of, burying what's already inside you. So the book is about two things. One, it's about actually defining the real mechanism of charisma and why someone's charismatic versus someone who isn't, which isn't really understood. And I was actually kind of shocked that no one had expressed it very clearly, at least not that I could find easily already. And if you don't know why something works, you can't get more of it, right? At that point, you're just guessing, and maybe it works or maybe it doesn't. But what should I work on? Because I don't know why. Like if you want to win a basketball game, you have to know why you win, because you score points. So you work on different ways to score points or to prevent the other team from scoring points. But to go out there and just be flashy and dribble the ball really well, but not get the ball in the basket, you're not going to win the game. You got to understand why you're there to begin with and what's working. And then the other thing was also to overcome some of these myths about charisma, like, it's born, it can't be taught, charisma is bad, so you can actually unlock it and get that full potential, which we all have inside.
I love that. And I think I like the idea of unlocking, because what it says, and I know you say that in kind of the intro or the back part of your book, is that we all can access it. There are those that may exhibit it more and they have unlocked theirs. But in your book, you're talking about how each person, irrespective of if it appears naturally or not, gets to, how they can then show and exhibit that as well. And then what kind of results that you can get when you do that, right? That's kind of the part of it, is that, we all want to learn new skill. We all want to learn to kind of be our best selves, but it's kind of getting to the bottom of how does that show up at work, at home? What does is there a net benefit from learning that new way of being. And I think that's something that you bring to the table with not only the book, but also like the Charisma Chronicles you're doing, all the different things that ways you're trying to highlight and accentuate what that looks like.
So can I share with you one concept that I've been sort of noodling on and been hearing from other people that's been really informative as to this approach. So let's say, Heather, you want to become really good at chess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can teach you how all the pieces move, right? I can teach you that the knight makes an L, a pawn can only move forward on a straight line, the queen can do this. And I can teach it to you so, it's like the matrix. It's uploaded into your brain and you know all the moves. It's like memorized. But guess what? You don't know how to play chess, right? You know
Mm-hmm.
what the moves are, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to be a good chess player. Why don't you know yet? You know all the moves. Why don't you know?
Part of it is practice, probably.
Absolutely.
Exposure.
Yeah, you've never played chess. You
Yep.
just know the moves.
Yeah.
You know the surrounding moves. It's just to go back to, like any other sport or hobby. I could teach you, where the keys are on a piano, but if you don't actually start playing it and see how people respond, you actually are not a musician, right? So
Yes.
that's one of the things that's frustrating to me. Don't get me wrong, I love lists just as much just as much as the next guy. I'm a huge list guy. I love it. Like, oh, give me those 3 bullet points, those 5 bullet points. But when it comes to teaching something interpersonal and something that you have to do like live, like we're talking live, like I don't have
Yep.
time to stop and check, okay, how do I be a guest on a podcast? There's no time for that, right?
Yep.
You have to know how to do it and learn it by doing it over and over again and improving it. And maybe you start from reviewing a list and saying, okay, I'm going to concentrate on this or that, but that's not how you learn and that's not how you improve. I could read an encyclopedia on being a podcast guest, but until I go on go as a podcast many times and I'm good and I'm bad and sometimes I'm better, then I don't really improve my abilities. So that's another big thing that's kind of interesting to me, that people think you can read a list about attributes of something. You can read
Mm.
Pete Sampras or Roger Federer, like how they are on the court, right? Doesn't make you a Wimbledon tennis champion. No, you got to get out on the court, hit some balls, play some matches. You can't skip that step. So that's been something that's kind of illuminating to me. It's like, wow, these lists are helpful, but people wonder why don't they work, or you try to implement it and then everyone's like, what are you doing? You're so weird. It's because you're trying to execute a list instead of being a human being and doing what comes naturally.
Let's say hi to a couple of people here, or at least see if there's any questions here as well.
Sure.
I say hi, Rhoda and Donna Luisa, and let's see. Wow, let's go try to see if there's any questions here. Sarah, very exciting to have you here, my dear.
Sarah.
You're the one who brought us together, so yay. John Haynes, another leader with heart, talking about really the 70-20-10 rule application and then on the job scenarios, type scenarios, which is what you're talking about. It's so true. Both of you are part of my power team. Donna Luisa says part of us. We are both part of her power team. I love that. Hello, Michelle from Fiji. Love that too. Yay. I like when people are joining us near and far and everything in between. Hi, Laquita.
Did you say from Fiji?
That's what it says. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Bula from Fiji. That's what it says. I don't know. And then Brian Schulman's here. Now, when Brian's on my LinkedIn Live, I think we have something going on. There must be a good part of a recipe happening here.
Awesome.
And then John Haynes is saying there's a refinement and an attractive factor and a confidence factor to charisma. Almost have to decide to be all of yourself. Ooh, come on, Joe. Let's talk about that. Because I know you're talking. I know that's the main crux of what you're talking about in the charisma side.
Yeah. So let's back into it a little bit. So your guest said something about attractiveness, right?
Yes.
So before I wrote my book, one of my colleagues actually asked me this. His name is Chirag Patel. He was actually the inspiration for writing this book, not because he's so charismatic, which he is, but because he kept on peppering me with all these questions about charisma, and I was forced to think about it. And I was like, wait, this is actually some pretty good stuff. But one of the questions he asked me, and He asked me, Joe, do you have to be good looking to have charisma? Because if you think about a lot of people just, from a public standpoint, a lot of charismatic people are like actors or actresses or musicians or athletes, and they're generally better looking than the average, individual you might run into on the street. And one of the concepts that I talk about is there's simulated charisma and well, how do I describe it? Yeah, there's charisma that's simulated, and there's charisma that is bona fide or bona fide. I can never remember how to say that. And so simulated means you have the trappings of charisma. You have the markers or the identifiers, right? So what are the markings of someone, let's say, who's rich?
Well, I mean, they might have things or save more or have a bigger bank account. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, like
Okay.
what can you see? What can you see externally?
Yeah, because it could be cars, big houses. It could be those types of things. It could
Exactly,
be the way they're
exactly.
dressed.
It's all the aspirational stuff. Nice watch, nice car,
Yes.
big house, right?
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that they're rich, right? They could
It
be
doesn't. Oh, absolutely.
they could be an imposter, right? Catch me if you
Yeah.
can. They could just be pretending to be a person. They could, identity theft. But they're powerful signifiers of wealth, right? Because our brains think, well, if someone has that, they must be wealthy. And it's the same thing with charisma, because our minds, heuristics, right? Our minds do these shortcuts, right? Because we don't have time to like analyze everything as we're moving through life.
Exactly.
So one of the heuristics for whether someone is charismatic is, are they good looking? Are they tall? Do they have a lot of people sort of listening to them? So our mind sees that and they're like, wow, that person must be really charismatic. But it only takes you so far. That doesn't actually deliver charisma, because if you open your mouth and you're like an absolute bore or narcissist, right? And you don't deliver charisma, people are going to be like, forget this, right? And they'll feel like a little bit duped. So the opposite of that is bona fide charisma, where you don't have to have any of those trappings. Now, does the simulation help? Yes, because sometimes it gets you in the door and it gets people primed to be more receptive to your message. But it shouldn't be confused with the actual delivery of charisma, which is the experience that you deliver to the individual. So if I could choose between being really good looking and tall and not good looking and tall, of course, every day of the week, I'm going to pick the good looking and tall because it's going to help you and it's going to smooth
access.
but it's not a substitute for actual charisma.
Yes. And it's interesting because when I think about, I think back when I was in law school, so I'm going back many years. I don't want to be dating myself, but I remember there were some people that you wouldn't maybe see them on the, I guess, attractive meter or whatever, again, like it's so subjective, right? But I remember them being like super engaging. This one particular person just being like very engaging, super interested, funny. And that's another thing, like charisma. I feel like a staple might be someone who has a certain sense of humor. It could be self-deprecating sense of humor or just lighthearted humor. What do you think about humor and charisma?
I think humor is a fantastic sort of tool for charisma. Other obvious ones are, being able to ask great questions, being engaged, having good presence. They all point to the same principle, though, Heather. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And that principle is your ability to change the state of the person that you're having the experience with and who you would hopefully like to think perceives you as charismatic. So what humor does is it takes you from a point where you're like, and you're just like this to like, oh my God, this is so much fun. This is so right. You've changed the person's state, and maybe they needed a good laugh, right? Maybe they were kind of down or they were low in energy, and you gave them that gift of changing their state. In this example with humor, it doesn't have to be humor. It could be lots of things. But that's what creates the charisma.
Oh, I love that. Number one, so I love giving to people. So the idea of giving a gift, and it's a gift of yourself, I love. But changing the state, I mean, as a facilitator, which you are and I am, as a speaker, which we both are as well, like those types of things, right? As a writer, we both are. And in any situation, how effective we are with our mediums, right? It's going to be based on how well we can change their state and change to a state of in a place they want to be. Versus, for example, you can be in a state of boredom. Right? We can be in a state of anger. There's all these things that can come up depending on what it is we're delivering. And maybe if that's what we intend and that's what we want, I mean, like we could get some people, if we're speaking to an audience, we could get people like a little angry about maybe how someone's being treated when we're talking about things. And maybe that's what we want right then, because that anger might then convert into enlightenment, into a change of behavior because they are angry at someone else behaved, right? So I like that idea of a changing of the state. I talk a lot about how leaders are the ones that really drive retention, because it's how they make their people feel that determines how they if they're going to stay or not. And so it's that feeling and that changing of state of the people that are there. If they feel like I'm cared for, if they feel like that, or if they don't, right, based upon what we've done. So I love that. I absolutely love that changing. That right there will stick in my head for charisma.
So that is that comes from the definition that I came up with for charisma. This is the key to the whole book, the whole concept. If you can understand this one sentence, you can unlock charisma. You don't have to read any other chapters. They just supplement this underlying concept. And the way I state it is, normally, you look up a definition of charisma and it'll say, it'll describe the effect of charisma, right? They'll say a special magnetic charm or appeal. It'll say something that makes people want to spend more time with you, right? That describes the effect. It doesn't describe the mechanism that generates the charisma. So what I tried to do is come up with a definition which actually reveals what would actually need to happen for someone to perceive you as charismatic. And that definition is: charisma is the ability to sense and ultimately deliver exactly what is needed from an emotional perspective in a given moment. So let me say that one more time. Charisma is the ability to sense and ultimately deliver exactly what is needed from an emotional perspective in a given moment. And if you can do that, I don't care what the scenario is, I don't care who the audience is, whether the person's famous, poor, rich, fat, skinny, doesn't matter. You will be charismatic to that person if you have delivered on that concept right there.
I love that. So the ability to sense makes me immediately go into emotional and social intelligence. So sensing others and how what you're doing impacts others is absolutely the social intelligence side, which again is why you're part of the Leadership with Heart community. Hey, don't forget to anybody is watching right now. Joe is actually on episode 34 of the Leadership with Heart podcast. And he's talking about connection there in a very unique way. And I think it was kind of the precursor to this charisma book that he wrote. It really is. So
absolutely.
Go and listen to more of his brilliance and that interview there, episode 34 of the Leadership with Heart podcast. But I love this idea of sensing. And then I love the action, that action portion of it, right? Because we can sense things all day. What are we going to do about it? And it's an intentional act is what it sounds like you're saying. That there are. It's funny because I think about like people who might be charismatic. It doesn't seem like they're purposefully doing things, right? It seems natural and it's like, this is what they do. But there is a, even if it's just a quick second thought, there's a thought process that goes into the action that follows the sensing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you describe is exactly what's going on, Heather. And I think there's two ways that it happens, right? One way is, people always think about people who are like, quote unquote, naturals, right? Like they just breathe, ooze charisma. They can do nothing wrong, right? So in that sense, they're not really thinking of it. They're just, their natural way of operating, sensing, delivering is already in tune with that definition, right? It's like they're not trying. That's who they are, right? Just how some people are better at listening or better at, doing whatever. It's like a natural ability that they have already. Now they're following the principles, but they're not following them consciously. But then there's also the case where maybe maybe you're not always charismatic, but you find yourself in a situation where you need charisma and you have to make a choice, right? Do I just keep doing what I'm going to be doing, or I do something different? So I have a really great example that I just learned from a colleague of mine, Janice Riley. She's going to be on the first episode of the Charisma Chronicles. And so she had this situation where she was in one of these, these corporate meetings, right, where you're trying to like grab ideas, and it just wasn't working. What she normally wasn't doing, what she would normally do in this meeting was not working for this meeting. People were upset. They were, body language just was not, she was not going to get what she needed for herself or for the organization. So that's step one. She read the room, right? She sensed what was going on. The second thing she did, and this goes to what you were saying earlier, Heather, she made a choice. She adapted. She said, okay, am I going to keep doing what has worked in other meetings, or am I going to try something different? And then she decided to try something different. And the third thing she did was she delivered. Instead of just thinking, hey, I should do something different, she did something to change the state of the room by standing up, by tapping people on the shoulder, by, making eye contact and, demanding an answer until someone gave it to them. So I called it RAD. I just made that up because it's easy to remember, read, adapt, deliver. But that's what she did to be charismatic, and the meeting was a big success. And to this day, people still remember that meeting because it was so kind of unusual what she did.
That's interesting. I think of when I'm listening to you, and I'm going to read, there's questions that we have in here. So I'm going to make sure I get to those questions as well.
Sure.
So thank you everybody for engaging. I absolutely love that. We're going to get to it, I promise. I remember I was giving a speech and I didn't feel like my energy was there. Like usually, I'm a high energy person, you know me.
Yeah, you are.
I felt like my energy wasn't there. And I felt like I in my head while I was talking, I felt like I wasn't giving my all. I just felt like I wasn't delivering what they maybe were hoping for. Mm-hmm. And so this sensing idea, okay, I sensed that maybe their energy wasn't as high as it could be because at that point, I don't know what it was. It was just one of the times I just didn't have as much energy. And so I sensed it. And so I immediately said, okay, we're going to take the microphone and I'm going to pass it around. And we're all going to start talking. And immediately when they start talking, their energy went up, my energy went up, and then everything changed. And I knew that was going to happen. And it reminded me, it's the same thing, like the TED Talk. I go out on the stage. Before I go on the stage, I'm nervous as I can't even tell you. It's crazy nervous.
Yeah.
And then I get out there and I see eyes. The first idea is just light. And I was like, I'm really nervous. But I saw eyes. And when I started to see people, then I'm like, okay, you're there. And I felt like now I can connect with you. You are connected with me. I connect with you. And now we can like make magic together, right? In this exchange of just nonverbal, right? And so it's interesting when you said that, the sensing, the choice, the movement, the state, all of that, I'm thinking about that. So thank you for making me think more about that impact, Joe. One of the questions from Laquita, thank you. She said, how do you know someone is not authentic, but they are charismatic?
How do you know someone is not authentic, but they are charismatic? So if I understand the question, that kind of goes to the morality of the charisma. So the way I think about that is charisma in and of itself has no moral quality to it, right? The fact that you can take someone from one state to another is an ability. So I can take you from, sad to happy, or I can take you from happy to like really angry, right? But I can learn how to do that as a human being to connect with people and move them to different levels. The morality lies with the individual, right? And I'm not sure that necessarily, that there's an easy way to tell, like, or read a person's mind or intent. But at a very high level, I would say, is that person, doing something to benefit just themselves at your expense? And that's not always immediately apparent. Like sometimes that can show up after they've pretended that they're looking out for you. Or are they doing something, and I would say not just to benefit you, but to benefit you and them together as sort of like a system or a unit, because that to me is the mark of someone who's more ethical, who is more in tune with, community, versus someone who's just playing this zero-sum game and they just want to get more. So if for them to get,
Mm.
someone has to lose. And at that point, charisma becomes more of a manipulation
I was just going
tool.
to say that. That totally made me think of that. As soon as she asked it and you said it, it made me think about that. If
Yeah.
you're using
So
it as a tool that is a tactical tool to achieve the things you need, then it seems to be more manipulative. I like the idea that you talk about as a unit.
yeah,
So that if you're exhibiting charisma, and it's a kind of this win-win idea where everyone is getting more out of the experience, as you related, right? You talked about experience, and I 100% agree with you that it is an experience, but it's an experience that should come from what the unit needs versus what it is I'm trying to get out of it. So I love that perspective. That's great. Let's take another question. Donna Luisa, the one who said that you and I are part of her super team. Um, she wanted me to basically expand on social intelligence a bit. So when we look at emotional intelligence, the doorway to emotional intelligence is emotional self-awareness. It's knowing kind of yourself, what your limitations are. It's just knowing more about you. And then the social intelligence is kind of like understanding how you work and how you move in space, how it impacts others, and also just what's going on in their life or what's going on in the organization. So for example, I've been, sometimes this could be an area of me when I look at emotional intelligence, this might be one of the areas that could be my weakest point. And what I mean by this is I have a high self-awareness. I have a high ability to inspire and move teams forward. However, I am a fast moving person. So sometimes I don't take into consideration there are lots of things that are happening like in the background when I'm trying to move fast. And so if I'm not aware of the situation that's happening around me, that means my social intelligence is lower. Okay. So that's my area, my constant work in progress. So hopefully that helped a little bit, Donna Luis. And Joe, if you have anything else to expand on that, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think it's people who kind of are fast, and I don't mean fast like it's superior to slow, but people who kind of think and move a little bit more faster versus people who are more deliberate. I think that's a common challenge for them, right? Because they're going their speed, and it tends to be faster maybe than the average or everyone else's speed. So what I've noticed, at least from a charisma perspective, and it echoes exactly what you're saying, Heather, is one of our barriers to being charismatic is we are just so into what we want to share and the great thing that we have that someone could be trying to tell us something which is exactly the thing that we need to help, but we can't hear it. Why can't we hear it? Because we're talking, right? When we're talking, we can't really talk and listen at the same time, right? So, one of the things that I've been working on is an exercise where I call it blank paper, where what you do is you ask someone or guess to someone how they're feeling, and then you ask someone or guess how they're feeling, how their state is, and then when the answers come back, when the talking comes back, you actually don't say anything, right? You're like a blank sheet of paper, and all the words that are coming back are like being written on you, right? And
Wow.
you're still engaged, you still nod your head, you still, but you don't talk, you don't ask questions, you don't do anything. You allow that just to come out and be written on you. And what happens is when you do that, which is rare, I rarely do this, but you're just learning so much, right? You're absorbing everything, and because you're not talking, you can see, like, do they seem sincere when they say it, or do they seem like they're that they're trying to cover up something, or they're anxious? Like you can see all that because all you're doing is just being a blank sheet of paper and you're just listening to them. And then so what happens is at some point something's going to click in your head and you're going to go, oh, I see, this is what's really going on with that person. And at that point, only at that point, you engage. And now you start to write on the paper by filling in gaps, asking questions, giving suggestions. And now you're writing on the paper together. but you let the other person go first so you can figure out where to go together, because you know where you want to go. You don't need to talk to know where you want to go. You know already, but you have no idea what the other person is about until you let them express it.
I'm as you're saying this, you're making me think of Sarah Elkins, of course, our my sis. I'm the only child, so she's like my sis, and she knows that. But she talks a lot about this type when we're talking about communication and active listening. And she does training on this, of course, for people too. How are you? But I like, maybe you guys can she can include some of this talk in there. I love this idea of being that blank page, and like resting in the message that they're telling us, and basically creating almost a void in our mind, or erasing what's in our head. I talk about reframing a lot, and this is kind of in that context of like, I'm making a commitment to just completely empty right up here. Like I need to empty, because if I don't empty, I literally have that long list of the tasks you talk about. But if I sit there as that blank sheet of paper and let them write on my mind and on my heart, then maybe I'm able to receive what it is they're saying in a more compelling way, and in a way that helps me really be able to meet them where they're at. I love it. Love it. I mean, this is going to be in that book. I'm adding this in the book as Joe's.
Oh, thank you, Heather. And the great thing about that, right, is we've all experienced these situations where, like, we go into battle. We're ready. We have our, logic, we have our reasons, we have our history, and we're ready to go. And we go in and we're like, ba, 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 and we think it's a knockout. But the other person's like, no, let me tell you my reasons, my logic, my history. And then you end up sort of spiraling, and it becomes this long boxing contest, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you let the other person go first, sometimes they tell you exactly what you need, and you're like, boom, you just boom, and you knock them out just because you know exactly what it is. And by knockout, I don't mean you win, but I mean like you get to the point where you both need to be very quickly, and it's a win-win for both of you, versus this struggle back and forth, because you're just talking about your thing, they're just talking about their thing. Some psychologists called it, had a great term for it. It's called side railing, where you're on one track and they're on the other track, never to meet. You're never going to meet because you're just hearing your track, they're hearing their track. Why would you meet? You're just going to keep going and going and missing each other completely. So I think that's a lot of interactions that we have because we've forgotten, or we've been trained almost in a way, or socialized to just be like, logic and argument and debate without taking into account the other side. It's not a one-sided thing. It's a relationship between you and me. If we forget the fact that there's another person on the other side, you've kind of already lost.
Oh, yeah, that's powerful. And for everybody who listens, if you already listened to the podcast, the one that's actually recorded versus this live kind of offset from it, but you hear me making all kinds of noises. I do that. I know it might be strange to some, but I tell you, it's because I am so locked into the guest. I am listening so deeply to where he's coming from. And that is actually the thing. So that's the thing, that particular thing that locks me in and makes me just like, and just make these grunting sounds, right, is the thing that makes me the manager that I have always been. So I have lots of weaknesses, and boy, I could list those for you, right? But the desire to listen deeply, and to feel, I don't want to say, some people think the empathic part is kind of strange when I talk about it, but to really feel what the other person is getting to. And sometimes then being able, like you just said, boom, I deliver that message back to that person. They could come to me with some pain or something. And I've listened so deeply that boom, I say one thing and I land right on where like they could not even mouth this accurately. They didn't even know how to tell me what it was. And I was able to say it. It was because of what you're talking about. That's one of my strengths. So I love being able to show people how to do that. And then and it's not a manipulation. For me, it gives me joy. It fills me up. I feel like when I leave this show with you, I'm just be like, like so filled in a real way, because I'm able to connect with you this way. Right. And I think if people think of it that way, like and you talk episode 34, you talk about this idea of connection in your own Joe Kwon way. I love it. So definitely listen to that, guys, because he always has his unique spin. And Linda, you mentioned something about is this another way of referring to emotional intelligence or emotional IQ? And I think there are absolutely elements to that. Joe, what do you think about that? Do you think that your elements of charisma that you think a lot of them really connect closely to EQ?
Yeah, I mean, to me, EQ or having it is a foundational kind of thing because and EQ is a little bit of a difficult word because you can have all the attributes of EQ without thinking like I have. Like the people who we know who have the most EQ, they haven't read a book on it. They don't have it because they have a training. They have it because they are just an empathetic type kind of person. And it's the rest of us who need to who need to learn it and get a little bit more or go back to basics. So yeah, and the reason why the distinction between charisma is it's the application of your EQ in a way that moves the person somewhere where they need to be, right? So it can be it can be for good again, or it can be for bad. But I would say that the charisma is the same, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say you need more self-confidence, which you obviously don't. But let's say you're the type of person who needs more self-confidence.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I just talked about that speech, Joe.
All right, imposter syndrome is another episode, Heather.
Another episode.
So I sort of interact with you in a way that makes you start to feel more self-confidence, right? So I can do that, and then we can have this great collaboration together, and then you can thrive, or I can use it to say, join my cult, give me money, drink the Kool-Aid, right? I mean, but it's the same thing. I'm addressing the same need. There's nothing wrong with the need or moving you to a better state, because without that, I have no charisma. But it's why am I doing it, and how am I using this sort of enhanced relationship that the charisma gives me? Am I using it for myself? Am I using it for you? Am I using it for both of us, for the world, to make the world a better place? And what I would say is, I think if everyone was more charismatic, assuming that they're not doing it for like a shady reason, the world becomes a better place, right? Like if you can sense when people are down and kind of help them feel better, either as a manager or just as a human being, when you can sense that someone needs a little bit of a push, to go a little bit further than they realize they're going to go, it just makes the world a better place. They become a better person. You feel good about yourself, and the world gets better and better versus us just worrying about ourselves, not worrying about anyone else, and it's just like our agenda. Then you just end up with kind of a very dog eat dog kind of culture, and kind of a fearful place, right? Because you're always wondering about other people's agenda.
Yeah, this is so powerful. All of this is so powerful. And I think when we talk about emotional social intelligence, or we hear EQ, I think the difference in what you're talking about, it is like the size of a mustard seed, but I think it's so super powerful. And I think it's the purposefulness of it, the intentionality of it. So like some of us, again, there's like people who appear like they're moving through and they're just doing it naturally, like we talked about. But I think that it's those who have, from the get-go of interacting with any human being on this planet, an intention to help change their state, right? To one that's more positive, that helps them move forward, that creates positive action. And I think when I'm reading through, even like your definition of, you talk about, it's the ability to sense and ultimately deliver. Again, we can sense all day, is what Linda's talking about in this emotional intelligence and social intelligence, and we're sensing and we're kind of working in it, but there's still, when you're talking about it, really is taking it up a level that says there's a level of purposefulness and how we exhibit, how we deliver those feelings, those changes of state to others. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Heather. And if I could add one thing that you made me think about when you were talking, is one of the most powerful tools to having more emotional intelligence, to having more charisma, is like a super simple, I'm going to steal your word, reframing. Okay. So normally we think of ourselves as, I'm me, Joe Kwon, you're you, Heather Younger. I have my job, you have your job. I live in my city, you live in your city. I'm, Korean, you're not, right? So we have like a certain sort of categorization that we have that separates us from others. And that actually makes it harder to connect with people. So when we reframe to think of ourselves more as, we're all Americans, or we're all human beings on this planet, or if you want to go really kind of more woo-woo, like we're all just part of the universe, or energy, right? That immediately changes the nature of your interaction with a person. So now I'm not thinking, well, who do you know that I know? Right? I'm not thinking, well, at what state in your career or business are you versus mine? Can you help me? Or are you going to be looking for, me to help you? That all goes away. Now it becomes, well, what do we share in common? We both like to eat delicious food. We both love our families. We both love leisure time to recharge our batteries. We both love helping people. All of a sudden, all the things that are similar to us start to present themselves, rather than all the walls that we put up, somewhat artificially, I might add, to separate us from the person. And that prevents you from being charismatic, because you're now seeing the person as other, as opposed to being sort of part of a similar, community. And I think the latter is actually more the truth of the matter, rather than we're all so separate and different, right? Like if you and I are in a desert, I don't care if you're a CEO or a Navy SEAL or whatever, we're both going to need some water, right? If there's no water, we're both going to need water. You're not better at water than I am. It's the same thing. We're all more similar, than we realize. But I think our minds are built in a way, the heuristics again, to categorize and separate. And that's fine. But you just have to reframe it sometimes to not let that work against you.
I'm looking to see if there's any other. David, thank you for your David Beaumont. Thank you for actively engaging in this and posting lots of things. That thought process makes a difference. Consider the person as human first. Isn't that true? Because I think that I do believe that when we continue to put ourselves in boxes, I was literally a part of a Twitter chat last night. I never do this, but I was doing this with Kimberly Davis and several other people. And we were talking about, boxes and how many boxes we put ourselves in. And this is more of a kind of a self-leadership concept, but I like this idea because it still is self-leadership when we're talking about reframing how we think of other people in the human space. And let's remember too, that Joe Kwon's dubbed name is the Connection Counselor. And he does this again. He's on my podcast, episode 34 on that. He was an amazing facilitator, no longer virtual. And I saw that level of connection and connecting people and ideas and flow. And so he is someone that when you're listening to this, it's someone that you should follow, because I do think that he's super strong in this area and very emotionally intelligent. Oh, and did I mention, let's see, what is your background? What do you do for a profession again, Joe?
I'm a lawyer.
So he and I these are two lawyers talking about charisma and emotional intelligence. So let's just be clear on that. Give it a little hoot up for us. But I don't practice anymore. So I'm kind of like a recovering attorney, but he is still in it. So I'm glad to see a lawyer like him that's operating in the world with this kind of focus, this really others focus and the charisma. You were really bringing great value. Let me just make sure there's no other questions that we haven't answered, because boy, we have a lot of people super interested. Is there something here, everyone here that's on, is there something that we have not hit on? Something that you would like for either Joe or I to talk about in this charisma or emotional and social intelligence space? Some really great people on here from all walks, and I appreciate that. Let me know, because we'll be wrapping up here shortly. So Joe, I'm curious to know, what do you, I want people, I know you said you don't need to read the chapters. I'm going to give you the one sentence, but I bet you that after they heard that one sentence, they're probably like, I'm going to go get this book. So where can they get your Unlock Your Charisma book? And then maybe wrap up, maybe how, one or two ways, without giving away too much, one or two ways that we can be more aware of when we are using our charisma for good and when we're using it to manipulate. I'd love to maybe end on those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can get the book either on Amazon or Apple Books. Just type Unlock Your Charisma and Joe Kwon, Joekwon. Sometimes the search engine is a little bit finicky, but it's definitely there. Another good place to learn about charisma is my website. If you go to connection counselor, and that's counselor counselor.com. I have a lot of materials, and I link to articles that I've written for Thrive Global, as well as on my website on charisma that'll be helpful, I think. And then to your question, and I have the Charisma Chronicles video coming out this Friday on YouTube, so I'll be announcing that on LinkedIn. So I do something similar to this, Heather, but it's not facilitated by you, which would be great. It's facilitated by me, but yeah, very similar thing where we sort of break down certain things, and I have a guest, and you're going to be a guest eventually on it as well on a segment, so I'm looking forward to that. And then in terms of your question, how do we know when we're being charismatic and versus manipulative? The way I think about it is when you connect with someone so deeply, right, and you move in a certain way, they move automatically with you together. Like that's like a given. It's almost like you're it's almost like you do like the three-legged race, your legs are connected, and you just move together. And when you start to move separately and not take them into consideration, you start to feel pain and resistance both for yourself and the other person. And that resistance and pain, I don't necessarily mean materially. It's more like psychically. You can kind of sense that like this is not right, or you feel some guilt or remorse. It's like, wow, I really got so and so to do something and it was good for me, but gosh, I feel kind of bad for them.
Yes.
And I guess the last thing I would share related to how do you know, there's 3 ways you know that your charisma is working. And I call them the 3 L's, the charisma barometer. So the first L is the lean. When you're talking to someone, you've probably seen this, Heather, right? And you're really engaged with them. There's an imperceptible closing of the distance, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like literally like a lean, but your proximity tends to get subtly closer together, and the stronger it is, the closer that gap closes versus this kind of thing, right? So there's the lean. The second thing is the laugh, and by laugh it doesn't have to be a literal laugh, but there's like a lightness of spirit, right? Where the person is like, wow, this is a really great conversation. And then they may literally laugh, but they don't have to. So there's the look. There's the lean, and there's the laugh. And the third L is the look. And this one's my favorite. You'll see in their eyes, they're like, wow, this is a really interesting conversation. You're a really interesting person. And when they turn to leave, I swear you will notice this when you're having a really good conversation. Their eyes will kind of look up. I forget whether it's to the left or right, and they'll be like, wow, this is a really amazing conversation. And they'll do like a little head bob as they leave. Kind of like, when you have like that last bite of something that's really good, or you have a drink of something that's really refreshing, and you're like, they'll actually do that. I've seen people do that because it's so rare, in our busy, distracted worlds, to have such a strong connection with someone and have such a wonderful conversation. You'll definitely see the lean, the laugh, and the look.
Oh, I love that. And that's a great way to wrap it up, because this may have been the longest I've actually gone live. And it is because I'm completely engaged in your conversation. So it makes sense, connection counselor, that you have me hooked on this concept. I probably could talk about it for the next couple hours. And I think there are people that are just staying on here too. So I think they would love to continue here. This has been great, guys. And Joe, thanks so much for coming on. Everyone, for next week, I'll be having a special guest on as well. And we'll be talking about how do we develop resilience and overcome adversity in our people as leaders. And so that's going to be a fun one. I'll promote that out here soon. But I'm glad you joined me for Joe's. And again, don't forget to check him out. So his book, Unlock Your Charisma, on Amazon. And then, of course, his episode 34 on the Leadership with Heart podcast. It has been great. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks so much for inviting me.
You're welcome.